Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back to our last couple of videos on chapter 14. What we're picking up here are reflexes. And let's start by talking about reflexes as being involuntary, rapid, we can also say automatic, which is sort of another way of saying involuntary, responses to specific stimuli. Now, reflexes can be something that are innate, meaning you're born with, it's hardwired, it's something that's just part of the neural wiring and processing, but they can also be learned. So depending on if you've trained your body to have automatic responses, we do this with sports, right? We do this as part of our athletics. So a tennis player or a ball player, when they see that ball coming at them, they're prepared. They know how to move their body. They know how to respond really fast to hit the ball with the bat or hit the ball with the tennis racket or catch the ball, right? Me, it's probably going to hit me in the face because I'm not trained. I'm not trained on that, right? If you're, a dancer or a gymnast or something along those lines, you have maybe a different set of reflexes that you've trained. If you're a soldier or a survivor of domestic violence, you might have a different set of reflexes that you have learned to protect yourself over time. So as we think about reflexes, these are protective. Maybe let's put that in here as well. Protective in nature, okay? So we can talk about them as either being learned or acquired, or, so some are the same, or innate. Sometimes our reflexes are processed at the spinal cord level, and sometimes they're processed at the brainstem level. So we can talk about reflexes as either being spinal reflexes, which is what we're going to focus in on our discussion here, or we can talk about them as being cranial reflexes processed at the brainstem. We talked about a couple of those already when we talked about the midbrain. So go back to that piece and make sure you're thinking about that. We can talk about reflexes as being somatic. This is what we're going to be focusing in on this whole semester. We've dealt more with like the body, and remember in this context we're talking about like the skin and the muscle and the bone. So a somatic reflex is a movement of the whole body. These are things that even though we're not consciously controlling, we're consciously aware of these kind of responses, or they can be autonomic or visceral. So that's going to be more of our conversation for next semester. That's something like the automatic response that's adjusting heart rate or blood pressure, respiratory rate that's outside of your conscious awareness. They can be contralateral. We introduced these terms already. That means cross body. Or they can be ipsilateral, which is talking about same side. Cross-body responses, contralateral responses are going to be more complicated. If you think about if you step on, a thorn with your left foot, you want to pick up your left foot so you can get that thorn out, but you don't want to fall over, right? And so you have to coordinate movements picking up the left foot while you're also putting down your right foot and maintaining the whole postural balance so that in that transition, you are still protecting yourself, right? You're still staying upright. And we also have what are called monosynaptic. In the case of a monosynaptic, we're going to see that you have your sensory neuron synapsing directly onto your motor neuron. So the sensory, remember we can call this the first order sensory neuron synapses directly onto the motor neuron. Super fast, automatic. All of the processing is happening right there between these two neurons. Or you can have what's called polysynaptic. So this means more than two. So in this case, maybe you have your first order sensory neuron coming in. Maybe we have it synapsing onto an interneuron. And we can have even more than this. And maybe the interneuron then is synapsing onto the motor neuron. Okay, so I drew out some pictures here. Let's go back to the idea of the monosynaptic. So for monosynaptic, I drew a first order sensory neuron. It's a unipolar neuron. So remember, axon dendrite becomes continuous with axon cell body to the side. And the axon of that first order sensory neuron is directly synapsing onto a multipolar motor neuron. So I just simplified my drawing with a circle cell body and then an axon going out to the effector. That's monosynaptic. When we talk about polysynaptic, you have more than two neurons. You have more than this one synapse. So in this case, I drew my unipolar first order sensory neuron coming in, synapsing onto an interneuron. So my interneuron, I have just my cell body and I have an axon that's branched. And so one branch of the axon goes directly to the motor neuron. The other branch of the axon, I have it like it's pointing up to the central nervous system, or let's just say to the brain. And so in the case of a polysynaptic, often there's, multiple branches of the axon and the information can be widely distributed throughout the body so that you're getting that automatic response, but you're also getting some conscious awareness of, what's happened. And so we'll talk about examples of those in just a minute. Okay, I want to go through one more thing here in this video, and then we will take a quick break. So we're looking, remember, at our transverse section here of our spinal cord model that we've been working with quite a lot. We have our gray matter in the inside. Remember, we have our posterior gray horn, and our posterior gray horn at the back is going to house our somatic. Let's keep things somatic division here because that's going to be our focus. So our somatic sensory nuclei at the back and the posterior gray horn. And we actually, let's just leave it like that. And then in the anterior gray horn, we're going to have our somatic motor nuclei. And then we can see our posterior root coming into the back of the spinal cord. We have our spinal ganglia. Ganglion has our bulge in the posterior root. We see where posterior root comes into the spinal nerve. And then we have the anterior root at the front where the somatic motor nuclei is coming in. And so what we're going to see happening as our basic, what we can call reflex arc, we're going to see that we have sensory neuron coming in from the spinal nerve to the spinal ganglion to the posterior root coming into the somatic sensory nuclei. And let me go ahead and do my unipolar sensory neuron. in my spinal ganglia. And then what we're going to see happening is that sensory neuron might then directly synapse onto a motor neuron in the somatic motor nuclei, and it's leaving that anterior gray horn, going out the anterior root, becoming part of the spinal nerve. The other thing that we're going to see here is in our reflex arc is we're going to have, I'll put in red with the sensory neuron, we're going to have a sensory receptor, and then we're going to have our skeletal muscle effector, which is doing our response. So our reflex arc starts with our sensory receptor, goes to our sensory neuron. And if you want to remember, this is going to be a first order. And then that first order sensory neuron is directly synapsing onto our motor neuron, which is then synapsing onto our skeletal muscle effector. So this is the most simplistic kind of view of a reflex arc. This is showing a monosynaptic, meaning you just have a single synapse between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. And as we'll look at some examples of reflexes, it can get more complicated than that. So stay tuned. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.